All right, today we're cracking open one of history's most fascinating cold cases. We're talking about a 500-year-old mystery of a missing king and the incredible story of how a team of researchers finally found his body.
So, picture this. King Richard III is killed in battle, they bury him in a makeshift grave, and then, poof, he vanishes from history. For half a millennium, his final resting place was just gone, shrouded in rumors, myths, and a whole lot of bad information. The big question was, where on earth did he go?
So you're probably asking, how does a king's grave just disappear? Well, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over centuries. He gets buried in 1485. Then, a few decades later, the church he's buried in gets torn down. Then, a juicy new story sends everyone looking in the completely wrong place for hundreds of years, until, finally, the real search begins in the most unlikely place imaginable.
Okay, to really get this, we've got to rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, to the chaos right after his death at the Battle of Bosworth.
You know, what's so wild is that at first, the historical record was actually super clear. After Richard was killed, his body was brought to Leicester, put on public display, and then buried in a church called Greyfriars. They even put a monument over the grave. So, case closed, right? Well, not so fast. Just 40 years later, King Henry VIII starts his campaign of demolishing churches, and Greyfriars was on the chopping block. The land got sold, a mansion was built on the site, and just like that, the trail started to go cold.
So the church is gone, but the truth got buried under something even tougher to dig up. A really powerful myth that would send historians on a wild goose chase for generations.
Fast forward to 1611, and this historian, John Speed, drops a total bombshell. He claims that an angry mob actually dug up Richard's body and chucked it in the river near Bow Bridge. Now, this story wasn't based on much evidence, but it was dramatic, you know? People loved it, and over time it just stuck. It basically became accepted as historical fact.
So this is the real turning point. For centuries, everyone thought the king's body was at the bottom of a river. But the modern search team decided to really question that assumption. Was it a real historical account, or just a convenient story somebody made up? So how do you bust a 400-year-old myth? Well, the team went straight to the source, John Speed's own map of Leicester from 1611. And they spotted a huge mistake. He'd marked Greyfriars Church in the location of a different church, the Blackfriars. He literally went to the wrong place. So when he couldn't find the grave he was looking for, it seems he just invented the river story, probably borrowing it from a local tale about a priest. And just like that, a centuries-old lie was unraveled. Okay, so the river myth? Busted. That meant the team could finally get back to the real question. Where was the original Greyfriars Church anyway?
And this is where the real detective work kicks in. It's so cool. They dug up the earliest detailed map they could find, from 1741, which showed the area as a big mansion with gardens. Then, using modern tech, they layered today's city maps right on top of that old one. It's like a historical Google Earth. And doing this showed them exactly how new roads and buildings had slowly eaten away at the historic site, leaving just a few small, undeveloped patches of land.
And what were those last remaining patches of open land? You're not going to believe it. A couple of city council parking lots. After all that work, after a 500-year search, the hunt for a lost king led them right here to a boring patch of asphalt in Leicester. You just can't make this stuff up.
All right, so the team has its spot. They've got permission to dig. But you have to understand, the odds of finding one specific unmarked grave by digging a few small trenches are, well, they're astronomical. It's a total long shot.
And this is where the story gets a little weird. A little spooky, even. Years earlier, the researcher leading this whole project, Philippa Langley, was walking through this exact parking lot and just got this powerful feeling, this intuition about one particular spot. She looked down and saw a painted letter R on the asphalt for a reserved parking space. R for Richard? I mean, come on, she just felt that was the place.
So they had 2 whole weeks planned for this dig. They were expecting a long, painstaking search. But they didn't need 2 weeks. They didn't even need 1 full day. 6 hours. 6 hours into day 1 of the dig, they hit something.
They unearthed a skeleton just a few feet away from that letter R. And right away, the clues start screaming at them. The skull had massive trauma, exactly what you'd expect for a king who died in a brutal battle. And then, the clincher, the spine had a very severe, distinct curve. Richard III was famously described in historical texts as having a crooked back. This was a huge clue.
Okay, so things are looking really good. but you can't rewrite history based on a hunch and some visual clues. They had a body, they had compelling evidence, but now they needed cold, hard scientific proof. And the key to all of this was something called mitochondrial DNA, or MTD. Now, unlike the rest of our DNA, this stuff is passed down almost perfectly unchanged, but only from a mother to her children. So think of it like a perfect family signature that gets passed down through the maternal line, allowing you to trace a connection across hundreds and hundreds of years.
And the work they did here it's mind-blowing. They couldn't trace Richard's line directly, of course, so they went sideways to his sister, Anne of York. From there, they painstakingly tracked an all-female line of descent for 16 generations, right down to the present day. They actually found 2 living relatives. The theory was simple. If that skeleton was Richard, his mTNA would be a perfect match to theirs.
But wait, there's a twist. While they're waiting on the DNA results, the carbon dating tests come back and they're wrong. The tests suggest the skeleton is way too old to be Richard. For a moment, it looked like they might have the wrong guy, but then another piece of science saved the day. Analysis of the bones showed the person ate a very rich, high-protein diet with tons of seafood, the diet of a king. And it turns out a diet like that actually changes the way carbon decays in your bones. Once they corrected for that, bam, the dates lined up perfectly with his time of death.
And then came the moment of truth, the final piece of the puzzle. The mitochondrial DNA results came back from the lab. It was a clear, undeniable, 100% match between the skeleton from the parking lot and the living descendants of Richard III's sister. They had found him. The discovery of Richard III is just an amazing story, isn't it? It shows how we can debunk old myths and use modern science to solve a puzzle that's been cold for centuries. It really makes you wonder, with technology like this, what other great mysteries from history are just out there waiting to be solved?